We have a great group of esteemed panelists with us tonight. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. So before we get started tonight, of course, I'd like to have a moment of silence to acknowledge the invasion of Ukraine as we are currently watching it all unfold. If we can have every head bowed, please. Thank you. So again, good evening. My name is Ashley Faison. I'm the advocacy manager here at YWCA, Tri-County area. I thank you all for joining us in this great conversation that we have planned for this evening, titled Repainting History. Our mission here at YWCA Tri-County area is that we are dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. At YWCA Tri-County area, our vision and core values include the following. YWCA envisions a world that holds equal promise for every person. We stand in solidarity with our community members against racial injustice and work towards a world where equality exists in every facet of our society. Through our collective work, YWCA Tri-County area will be known as an organization where all people, but especially women, girls, and families of color receive trauma-responsive, culturally competent education services that will support the enrichment of their lives. Our core values include YWCA is committed to drive change, to listen, facilitate discussion, support, and most importantly, act. YWCA Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers serve our community with integrity, courage, accountability, and compassion. YWCA celebrates diversity, practices inclusion, and promotes equality. For each of our conversations that we host, we ask our audience members and our staff to agree to 4 agreements of courageous conversation. We ask that you all stay engaged, meaning to remain morally, emotionally, and intellectually involved in the dialogue. We ask that you understand that you may experience some discomfort and that it's normal and almost inevitable when we have discussions around race. We ask that you speak your truth, being open about your thoughts and feelings, and not just getting in the space of saying what you think others may want to hear. And we also ask that you expect and accept non-closure. This agreement asks participants to hang out in uncertainty, understand that you're not going to get every answer to questions that you have in tonight's dialogue, and that conversations around race require ongoing dialogue as well. So a little bit before I introduce the panelists, I want to acknowledge that tonight's conversation is not associated with any school district. This is a space for learning and leaning in, growing, and we encourage questions that exemplify those characteristics. Any participants posing questions or comments incongruent to our message will be removed from the call. This discussion, again, as I mentioned, is not affiliated with any school district, and all of our panelists will be representing themselves and their experiences. Feel free at the end of this call to put any questions in the chat, and if time allows, we will offer a Q&A at the end. As I mentioned, tonight we are honored to share a seat at our YWCA table with a group of esteemed panelists. Introducing first, we have Matthew Reid. Matt was born in Penn Village, Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Matt studied history at Kutztown University, where he earned his bachelor's degree, continuing his education at Arcadia University, where he later received his master's in education. Matt is currently a high school history teacher who uses hip hop lyrics to connect his history lessons. Second tonight, we have Miss Naima Rhodes. Naima is a Pottstown resident, graduate, and educator. She's currently in her 7th year as the Career and Technical Education Program's Early Childhood Education teacher. In addition to her various support in the Pottstown community, Naima is a mentor of the Make a Change Foundation's program for teenage girls, Leading Ladies. Third, we have Miss Michaela Christine Richardson. Christine is a 1999 graduate of Pottstown High School, Career and Technical Education program with a concentration in healthcare technology. Christine also has a Bachelor's of Science degree in nursing from Villanova University. Christine has worked as an RN in various fields of nursing and began working at the Possum High School in 2011 as an instructor for the healthcare technology program. In addition to holding several other roles within the school district, Christine is also a proud member of the Make a Change Foundation's group of teenage girls, leading ladies. And our fourth panelist this evening is Mr. Ross Hamilton. Ross is a 2021-2022 Tech Plus Pennsylvania Policy Fellow, high school social studies teacher within the School District of Philadelphia, and a recipient of the Langback Award for Distinguished Teaching. Ross has a BA in Mass Media Arts from Clark Atlanta, a MS in Adolescent Education from St. John's University, and is currently pursuing educational leadership at Arcadia University. He resides in Glenside, Pennsylvania, with his wife Imani and 3 children, Anaya, Azaria, and Michael. Tonight, I will be turning this over to our moderator this evening. Our moderator this evening will be YWCA Tri-County's own Deanna Gonzalez, the Manager of Equity and Initiatives and Project Manager for United Hill, PA, a statewide initiative led by YWCA's Greater Pittsburgh, York, Lancaster, and inclusion of ourselves, Tri-County area. Deanna is a Philadelphia native who studied communications at LaSalle University, now residing in Gladstone, Pennsylvania with her 2 sons. Deanna's nonprofit career began in Philadelphia, where she worked with the Grassroots Community Foundation as a public health and social action organization that seeks to mobilize the community to offset economic disadvantages. During her time with Grassroots, Deanna served as the lead program health director and coach for the Leaves Girl program. Once her cohort with the foundation was complete, Deanna continued her nonprofit career here in the Pottstown community, working with several nonprofits, and now has joined our YW family. I thank you all for joining us in this conversation this evening. Again, my name is Ashley Faison. I am the advocacy manager here at YWCA, and I'm going to turn our meeting now over to Ms. Deanna Gonzalez.
Your mic's off. On.
I was trying not to give Ashley an echo, so sorry about that. But again, thank you very much, Ashley, for that warm welcome. And thank you so much to our very esteemed panelists. I appreciate entering the space with you today and do so humbly, particularly during Black History Month. You all are thoughtful and passionate leaders in your community. And I appreciate your willingness to join me here virtually with my YW family during Black History Month for our Repainting History discussion. So thank you, esteemed panelists. I'm excited to dig in with you tonight. So now that we've laid out our house rules for the audience in attendance, let's get started with this idea of repainting history. As I prepared for this discussion with you all today and read through the topics and questions we would be discussing together, I started thinking about my own experiences, excuse me, as a brown Latina, once upon a time, young student. I tried remembering who my most impactful teachers were, and I struggled to remember if I even had, or if any of them were Latina or Latino, and none of them were from kindergarten through 12th, and even in college, sadly. I did, however, form a deep connection with my high school Spanish teacher. For those of you that don't know, I'm very fluent in Spanish, but Latinos take Spanish for the same reasons Americans take English. My Spanish teacher at the time had a son my age. She was a Black woman. It happens to still be a close, dear, and special friend to me and person in my life. And I could recognize the fact that because she is a woman of color, spoke Spanish like my family at home, and genuinely appreciated Latin culture. And as a matter of fact, she even at this time lives in Argentina, now that she's retired. She had a great impact on me as a young student of color in a predominantly white school. What she gave me as a mentor back then is something I will always treasure. I still do. That being said, I'd like to ask all of you, do you remember your first teacher of color? And what was the impact on your life at the time or even after? And Naima and Christine, I'd like to start with you guys, because in Leading Ladies, it's a mentorship program with the Make a Change Foundation over at the high school. And it's for girls 13 and 19. And I wonder what it means mentoring these girls in this age group, what it means to you, and some of the impacts that you're seeing in the mentorship program.
Okay, so, and just to be clear, you're asking about the program or our first teacher of color?
Both.
Okay,
Both.
so I'm sorry, I want to be clear.
It's okay.
So my first Black teacher, I had preschool teachers. I do remember that specifically, one lady, Miss Nancy. But once I entered school, I didn't have my first Black teacher until I moved to Pottstown from Phoenixville. And it was, I think it was 6th grade. And her name was Miss Ellison, and she was our social studies teacher. I think when I first got there, I didn't really get a chance to appreciate it like I should have, because the entire thing was a culture shock. I'd never seen so many Black students, and then they had Black teachers. So I was kind of just trying to take it all in. I do remember her teaching us Swahili. Anybody that went to Pottstown, you remember Ms. Ellison teaching us the words in Swahili. And that was the first time, like, that was important to me because it was the first time I had somebody teach us about Africa when they weren't talking about the enslavement of like my ancestors. So I was like, oh, there's actually more to learn about Africa besides slavery and you know, all of the stuff that TV showed you. So I don't think I appreciated it then like I do now, but we even had guidance counselors that were Black women at Pottstown. So there was a whole lot I was trying to like take in. As far as Leading Ladies, I mean, being
on the other side of that now as the mentor, as the person that's representing as a woman of color, what does that mean to you in the relationship for the girls?
So just as far as being a woman of color, for me personally, it's nice to I hate to say it, obviously Leading Ladies does more than just have like, you know, Black women as mentors, but just the fact that I'm there and there are, you know, young Black girls that can look up and be like, oh, there's a space that I can go to where somebody looks like me. And there's nothing wrong with being somewhere where there's white mentors and white teachers and stuff, but I hate to say it, but that's our norm. So sometimes it's just nice to know that like you can relate to somebody on a different level, because I hate to say it, like it is a little different. You do connect in a different way. So just knowing that I can kind of occupy that space and show everybody that you don't have to fit any box that people try to put you in, because I was not like the model student, and I was not like, you know, anybody from Pottstown. I was a young mom and everything. So it's just showing that you can be anything, and you can still, everybody's story can help somebody else. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Christine, what are your thoughts on your mentorship program now, and what it meant to you if you had a teacher who represented you or looked like you growing up?
My situation is just a little different. My mother was actually the guidance counselor at Pottstown for many years. So she literally was like my first Black teacher.
Awesome.
I did not have.
You hit the teacher lottery.
yeah, you did.
/ mommy lottery.
Right, exactly. And she just happened to, sorry, our lights go off every 15 minutes if we don't move. So just.
You look fine. Everything's fine.
That's okay. And she actually taught African American history here at Pottstown. So I got a lot of that experience. I do remember I went to Edgewood Elementary here in town, and we had a Black teacher there, Mrs. Brown. I wanted to have her so bad for fourth grade, but I didn't. I ended up not having her. I had the other teacher, which was fine, but she was still in the building. So it still made an impact just to see her there. And I just remember being a young girl and just being like, oh my gosh, first of all, I was like, oh, wow, she's so beautiful. And then I'm like, oh, wow, she's so smart. And then it was kind of just like, I kind of wanted to kind of emulate her and be like her, because it just showed like, hey, there's somebody out there that does kind of look like me and I can do this. It gave me that sense of, okay, I can do this. I can fit in. I do have a place somewhere. But it was in middle school actually that I actually had my first Black teacher, and that was Mr. Robbins. And he was our construction shop teacher.
Nice.
Yeah, but he did make a big impact because one, he reminded me of my father and grandfather a lot, but we didn't see even Black men in that arena. I mean, we have plenty, well, back then we had a lot of industry in town, and we knew people in town worked there, older men, even women. But to see them in a teaching role on the other side of the coin was very interesting. And he made a big impact in my life. And even to this day, like I'm very handy with things. I will pick up a tool, I will build furniture, I will do anything. And
Can you come over?
Yeah.
Because I'm the opposite of that.
Right. Yeah. I just don't want to hit, because I'm like, if I would have never taken shop class in middle school, I probably wouldn't, be inclined to do these types of things. But he made
hire people like me.
Right. And then with leading ladies, I kind of feel the same way Naima does. I feel as though I'm here for all young teenagers, but especially for our young girls who really struggle with trying to see themselves at 5, 10, 15 years from now. They come to us with big dreams. They come to us with lots of how do I say it? Lots of aspiration. And then once you transition out of high school and you get into the real world and you get into industry and you get into college, and then you look around and you're like, wait a minute, where are we at? Shock. And I went to Villanova University, so I was like one of a few. So just to be able to be there for them, to have somewhere where they can come, somebody they can talk to, somebody that kind of, they know that we understand what they're going through as young teenage girls, and then them along that way to kind of keep them on that path where, hey, these are your goals, these are your dreams, these are your aspirations, or you're going through this situation, you're going through this problem, let's work this out together.
And that's such a crucial time, right? That's such a crucial time when they're more aspirational and more ambitious. You really want to go ahead and be that person for them. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I remember being that girl that had like these really big aspirations, and
yes,
it certainly was helpful to have people nurture that. So
yes,
thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you. That's such a great point to make. Matt and Ross, I'd like to hear from you all about whether or not you had people that reflected you growing up as teachers.
So I guess I'll keep the Pottstown ball rolling. Pottstown product myself. So definitely Mrs. Hicks. Mrs. Hicks was probably my first and only Black math teacher in 6th grade. I was a challenging student. I gave her a hard time, but ironically enough, I had the opportunity to work with her years later at the Pottstown Middle School. And at that time, she was a history teacher, and her and I would converse a lot. And she did not see me as a challenge. She was very kind and passionate and understanding of where I was at the time. And I reflect on that, and I just found it funny. And I always appreciated her as I reflect on that moment as not the baddest kid, but I was pretty much a troubled youth. I never wanted to be a teacher till later. So it's funny how things turned out. I don't think in the moment I realized how important it was to have a Black teacher. And I think I realized it more when I worked with her and when I was starting to become that and wanting to be what I needed as a student. So and that continues to be my goal, to be what I needed as a student. later on when I worked with her, we would talk as I was developing, becoming who I am today and working on my degrees. It's just something that sits with me, and it's powerful. And then the transition and being on the other side, I realize it now. And I have situations with my students now who come up to me and say, hey, I never had a biracial teacher.
Right.
Thank you for that. She's
Thank you
thanking me for that.
Isn't that funny how this generation is more cognizant? You know,
Yeah.
Christine mentioned the same thing, right? That she realized later. And even Naima said she realized later, and all the connections I made with my own teacher, I realized later. And I think it goes back to that culture shock of when we get to college and we feel very much othered because there's so few of us there, right? And then even down to the curriculums and the subject matters, and we're not, you know, it's kind of like the same old subject matters, right? Like,
that's a key term, other, like being placed in a box. And it's the complexity with myself. Like I identify with by many things with intersectionality, and
right.
I'm technically Jamaican, and Ashley knows this. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, so cultural wise I'm Black, but I'm
Right.
Jamaican and white technically. And I teach my students about the intersectionality and how you are viewed with positionality.
Right.
Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. Like those things are important. My students know that early on in high school.
And we're going to get into that today.
Yeah,
we're going to get into to all of that today. Ross, I'd like to hear from you about this topic.
Yeah,
What does it
definitely.
mean for you?
Definitely. First off, thank you to the YWCA for inviting me to this discussion. And, you know, I truly appreciate it. One thing is that it's really important to have a mirror in the classroom. That's just so valuable. And right
It's a great way
now,
of putting it, a mirror.
right. And right now, those mirrors do not exist. So I just want to put some stats out there. In the United States, only 2% of teachers across the US are Black men. In Pennsylvania, only 6% of Pennsylvania educators identify as teachers of color. And that's a problem because we have now student population of color that's around 33%, which ranks Pennsylvania as one of the worst in regards to representation in the classroom. And so I just want to kind of put that out there. And I see it on a daily basis because I teach at a school that is about 90% Black, about 6% or so Latinx, and I'm the only Black male teacher in the classroom. That's a problem.
That's a problem.
Right. That's a problem when you're advocating for students behind the scenes at the table, whether that student's going to get suspended or not, whether you're pushing students into advanced programs, and where you're seeing in things so students. So you're always kind of like, that's really important to notice. So in my experience, since birth, I've been living like that dual consciousness that Du Bois out there, right? Race has been ingrained in me since I was born. And I grew up not in Pottstown. Sorry, I'm like the outsider here. I grew up in a suburban area.
Me too, by the way.
There you go. I grew up in a suburban area outside of New York City where I was, you know, it was diverse in some senses, but predominantly white. And from my K through 12 experience, I had nothing but a white narrative. And so I probably had one Black teacher in my K through 12 experience, and that was my 12th grade elective English teacher. And
yeah, it took a really long time, right?
A very long time. That shouldn't happen. And the thing about it is that Miss Forte changed my life trajectory, because she saw something in me that I didn't even see, that I was a good writer. So she pushed me to say, hey, you know, Ross, you need to put this writing to this contest that is in Westchester County. You should do it. Yeah. And, you know, as a young Black man, I was like, you know, I have no shot. Like, how am I going to compete against the rest of them, right?
And and what gave you those ideas? Media?
Well, yeah, a host of things. Like I said,
lessons that you were learning, right?
Right, just things you hear, different things, microaggressions, all the above. But then she kept nagging me. I'm like, all right, I'm going to put it in just so you can stop bugging me about it. And I wound up winning second place, and I had some money that, you know, that allowed me to go to college, and it helped out. But what I recognize is that Miss Forte was the only one that really pushed me to the point. What if that English teacher in 5th grade would have pushed me? Maybe I would have been the next writer, and I had more time to develop what I wanted to do. So, you know, that was one of my experience. But It's definitely an issue, the lack of representation, and hopefully that will change in the near future.
Speaking of your writing,
Sure.
and Matt alluded to what I'd like to talk about now. By now, everyone in the US has heard the words critical race theory, right? But very few people know what CRT is, and even fewer people can accurately explain what it is. So for clarity and for our audience members, I'll give a brief definition. Critical race theory is the name that was given to a body of legal scholarship 40 years ago. So some people today probably weren't even born in the audience, right? So 40 years ago, to further understand why inequality and racism persisted, and I'd say persists, even after the civil rights movement in this country, by studying and further analyzing the systems of laws and policy in this country. In other words, this is a graduate level legal theory, and it's not being necessarily taught in grades K through 12, right? Nonetheless, it's being weaponized and politicized in media daily, and across the country, we're seeing more and more aggressive backlash by parents, even at school board meetings across the country. And currently, 37 states are actively passing bills outlawing it. And some have even passed comfort laws. That's what they're being called, comfort laws, shielding people from discomfort over historic actions due to their race, nationality, or gender. This is happening most recently in Florida, where it was passed by their Senate committee. Ross, in your piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer titled "My Students Need to Know About Pivotal Black Leaders," you stated, courses must exist in these programs that provide aspiring social studies teachers with pedagogy to both design and facilitate lessons that adequately examine the multitude of supporting Black actors who have made movements such as the civil rights movement a success. Could you please tell us a little bit more about that? And perhaps what you might wish schools and communities understood as far as the differences between critical race theory and inclusive history, and some of the things that we just talked about in our own experiences.
Yeah, definitely. And I wrote that piece because I was doing a lesson, just a background, doing a lesson,
Right.
and on Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and I projected a picture of John Lewis, the late great John Lewis, on the screen, and I just posed a question, you know, who this individual was, and it was crickets, and they did not know. So I did the piece because it's like, how do we expect our students to cause good trouble if they don't even know who originated that concept? And so, critical race theory right now is that rabbit hole where, it's politicized right now and is here, there.
Weaponized, yeah.
Right. It's an idea that racism has shaped public policy in a way that benefits white people at the expense of Black. But I kind of flip it to the point where I handle my classroom as a point where I'm going to teach the truth, right? We can't ban the truth, hopefully not. And so I take the more of the approach where it's like inclusive history, which includes multiple perspectives in a way that all different voices are heard. And this is legalized because if you look at the standards, the social studies standards in Pennsylvania, standard 8.13b, it says identify fact, opinion, multiple points of view, and primary sources that are related to historical events. So here's how I approach it. I don't approach it in my classroom. We're going to discuss critical race theory. We're going to break this legal term down. I put it point, if I'm going to cover Thomas Jefferson, if I'm covering Thomas Jefferson, I'm also going to cover Benjamin Banneker.
Right.
So they go hand in hand. And
Right.
so when I was taught in my experience, my high school experience, right, Thomas Jefferson was a great man. He was the third president of the United States. He was the first Secretary of State. He helped double the size of the United States with the Louisiana Purchase, right? But I was never taught what he wrote in some of his writings, right? He wrote this book. It was called The Notes on the State of Virginia in 1781. And in that particular literature, he basically he basically disparages Black people both physically and intellectually, that we're inferior. And right after he wrote that, Benjamin Banneker wrote a response letter to that. And he wrote it in a very shrewd way, which I have my students examine. The way he did it was at the end of the letter, he challenged some of the things that Thomas Jefferson said, but he also included the almanac that he wrote. So at what point are you going to say that Black people are mentally inferior? But then here's the almanac that I wrote.
Right. So here are my receipts, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. Here are my receipts. And if you look at it further, Thomas Jefferson acknowledged it. He wrote a response saying, look, you are correct. And so when students of color see that, it opens up their minds.
Right.
Wow, here's a free Black man who is risking it all. When I say risk it all, it's 1791. You are challenging one of the most historic people at that time.
Yeah.
He's risking it all. So he's challenging institutional racism, microaggressions right off the bat at a time when people it would be uncalled of to do.
Right.
If students think about that, they'd be like, wow, not only do I now realize that not all Black people of color are enslaved, but there are free Blacks. That's something. And maybe I might want to look at Benjamin Banneker in a different way. I might feel pride about it.
Right. And I wonder how many of us even have heard that name up until now.
Very few, very few. And the last thing I want to say, but if we think about it, going to that concept of critical race theory, remember, I haven't mentioned it in the concept of presenting it, but this could be a lesson that you continue. And you look at it. Well, if we look at Philadelphia, a city that's predominantly Black, I see that there's a hospital named after Thomas Jefferson, a university named after him, a public transportation system named after him. But can you find anything named after Benjamin Banneker?
No.
Why is that? And it opens them up to a view of who are the decision makers, who's creating these particular policies, what's happening, why are some people being left out? And it's going to cause them want to know more. So that's my approach to doing it in regards to multiple perspectives.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for that awesome lesson. Matt, did you want to add to that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. I had the great opportunity.
No, please go for it. You were next anyway. I was coming to you.
Sorry. But I want to piggyback off what Ross is saying, and I had the pleasure to work with him hand in hand. I consider him my mentor, and like what Ross is speaking to is that balance. Like we have to have a balance to equal things out in the classroom. And his example was Jefferson and Benjamin Banneker. Same thing with like the interstate highway or government housing. How many people know that government housing was originally for middle class people after the war? There's articles we have to outsource to prove that. When we think of project housings, I'm from the same projects as Ash, Penn Village. We think that that's just created for Black people or Latino people. No, it was created for
impoverished people, right?
Yeah. So when they moved out into suburbia and Levittown was built, that's where you get the divide between the city. The interstate highway was built to cause that division. So if you think about it, without using the buzzword, we're already breaking down the laws that were established in the 1930s to create this division. It's been around for years. So this buzz, or people catching on this wave of this scholarship that was created in the 70s. And yes, you do dive into it in your grad school, but if you read between the lines, we're already acknowledging the laws that cause the division. 7 to 13 states in America either don't mention slavery or the civil rights movement. Glenn Youngkin just became the governor of Virginia. Interest groups have helped him become the governor based on not wanting Black history in their high schools. And then it takes one state for that domino effect, and that's scary. So if you want to be technical, we're like Ross said, you got to teach the truth. It's already there. We got to read in between the lines when it comes to and studying the laws that have caused such oppression and division.
Right. And if I can bring into the conversation another buzzword, because people are using the word CRT, but a lot of what we just heard from both you and Ross is what some of us call whitewashing, this sanitation of all these things that isn't in the narrative, right? These people that aren't in the popular narrative, right? But we're all learning today. So I wonder if you, and this is to all the panelists, Ross, you went into how you address it in your classroom. Ladies, I wonder how you all might be addressing it in your classrooms, or if the themes are even popping up. If our kids asking, what are these things that people are talking about in the news? Christine?
I'm fortunate enough in my classroom, I have a lot of, in healthcare, we cover a diverse number of topics, and we do focus a lot on cultural diversity. We focus on health disparity. We focus on many different things around race and race theory, and how did we get to where we were. We start out in the history of healthcare, not only healthcare itself, but how the environment and where we come from and where we live and what food we have access to, what resources people have access to, how that has shaped our healthcare system, since that's our focus. What I always do, and I owe a lot to Matt, I'm also, have introduced me to these other people who have contributed to our American history. And that's what I like to say. I don't like to say history, but American history, and really teach our students that no, it's not just Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, or that we just normally talk about year in and year out. There are other people out there. One of the things I do, and we just literally did it this past week, was during Black History Month, we do, and since the theme this year is health and wellness, we focus on people in healthcare, Black people in healthcare who've contributed to health. You would never know. The person who invented the blood transfusion was a Black man, and people don't know that. So I like to kind of show them from that perspective that, hey, you've looked at healthcare, we look at technology, we look at our public health and space, and we don't even know who developed these technologies, who developed this invention, who did this first surgery. And I like to go beyond Ben Carson, because that's the only person that they know of. That's the only person they've heard of. And I'm like, no, let's go back to the 1700s. Let's go back even before that. Let's go back to the ancient Egyptians, because when we really start to look back and look at history, the hub of healthcare and public health started in that area of the world where people of color come from. So that's kind of how I incorporate it. Yeah,
absolutely. Naima, something that I've always appreciated about you, how thoughtful you are with your students. You truly, genuinely love up on your kids, and it's, I had the pleasure of working with you as a colleague for a short time in the Peak Pre-K Counts program. And we would cross paths. So I've seen it boots on the ground. And one of the things that I love about you and what you've provided your students is that bold representation and just decorating your classroom, just like the little things, Talk to me a little bit about that. And why that's so important to you.
Thank you so much. So for me personally, because I come from ECE, early childhood education, a lot of our self-esteem comes from the things that we see, the things that we experience, and the things that we do as young children. I remember growing up in a predominantly white area and going to school where the only other kids that were Black were either my neighbors or my cousins. Was like, I didn't love the way I looked. Like, I don't think I appreciated all of my Blackness until I was about 27. And it was because my 4-year-old daughter, like, I kept telling her how beautiful her hair was. And she's like, well, why isn't yours straight? Like, because I'm relaxing my hair. And I'm like, man. So I had to kind of look at it like, what would it have been like if I was in my classrooms and the little Black girls, there were little Black girls and Black boys on those posters, and people with hair like me and people with skin like me. And I knew this was normal. Like, I felt like the way I looked wasn't the norm or it wasn't the standard. So I don't like that. I don't want anybody to ever feel like that. So it's part of what I do, and it's not just for Black people. I want to make everybody feel represented. I want all of my students to feel safe. They spend a lot of time at school, and why wouldn't you want them to, you know, be comfortable in that space? And I also think sometimes when we get into the secondary levels of school, we forget about those needs that kids have. They do want to see the posters and the pictures and the art and all that fun stuff. You know, at first they all like laugh it off a little bit, but eventually they're like, oh, I love your class, Miss Rhodes. And that's it. Like, I just want them to see, like, you belong in every single space you want to be in, whether somebody has broken that glass ceiling or not. If nobody's done it, you can do it. So I'm just really big on people knowing that you belong here. And I don't care how uncomfortable it makes other people, including yourself, because sometimes when you are the only person of color or woman or whatever in a space, you feel like uncomfortable. And I want them to know that that's okay. That's not your problem. That's everyone else's.
Absolutely. And speaking of young students, the wonderful young academic leader and now internationally recognized education expert and equity-minded scholar, Dr. Tyrell Strayhorn. He's very young. I don't know his exact age, but he is quite young. Young Black man. He is the senior vice president of Virginia Union University, and he defines belongingness in education as a feeling or sensation of connectedness, the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, and valued by faculty, staff, and peers. He further defines belongingness as a basic human need, a fundamental motivation sufficient to drive behaviors and perceptions. So that, I think that just puts an exclamation on your point, Naima, right? Matt, after reading the reviews of your book, which folks can read those reviews on Amazon, by the way, not so selfish plug. Your book is titled "My Home is in My Head." The overwhelming theme in the reviews, I couldn't help but notice, was that sense of belongingness, right? Is that when they read your book, they really felt represented. And people mentioned the hip hop references, which if we get into a whole hip hop digression, I'm happy to meet you guys there. But I was wondering, Matt, how do you make sure each of your students feels a sense of belonging in your classroom?
I love this question, but I want to definitely give credit to Naima saying it's not your problem. And that's exactly the positionality. We can't help how others view us. So definitely not your problem. I encourage the voice of my students in order to speak their truths. I think we all mentioned the truths, finding their voices. That's much easier to encourage juniors and seniors that I work with because they're most times vocal already, more so than underclassmen. I instill civil discourse so that every voice in the classroom is respected. Whoever holds the floor, everyone else is definitely listening. It makes for better discussions and learning with growth mindset. My Open and African American Studies project is griot storytelling, and it's powerful. I tell students to learn how to tell their own stories before someone else tells it for them. It speaks to the history of Africans and African Americans not being able to read or write their own stories. It's empowering to see students form this circle. I have them not only tell their stories, but create a shoebox with a piece of their life. And it's students of all backgrounds, all races, all experiences, finding their voice, being bold enough to speak and share something. And a lot of times they're nervous. I can't do this, Mr. Reid. What do you want me to talk about? And you find a lot about your student. It's a good way to connect with them. And when you connect with them, you can meet them where they're at. It transitions well into the complex topics of Black history itself. So Once they get past that and understand how important oral tradition, call and response, and griot stories are, and they tell their story, they're okay with the narrative, Emmett Till, whatever have you. And it's a good way to introduce them into African-American studies.
That all sounds amazing. And, you know, right now I kind of wish I was a little younger and I could be a student in all of your classrooms at this point. Ross, what about you? How do you nurture a sense of belongingness?
Yeah, and I encourage everybody go get Matt Reid's book, and that should be a part of a curriculum somewhere. And it really should, because you have to have that representation in our curriculum. And I learned the hard way. I started teaching in the South Bronx, and the majority of my students were from the Dominican Republic. And I came there with my own objective, and it was a lot of things that I felt were important. And there was some pushback, and I realized, wow, wait a minute, let me learn about their culture, and let me tap in, let me ask about this. What is this patillo you're eating? What is going on here? How can I incorporate that? And when they saw me learning, it was funny at first, but then they started appreciating it. So if you're teaching in a school, you have to appreciate the culture of the students that you're teaching. And right now, too many people are not. It's my way or the highway. And so there's a preeminent scholar, her name is Gloria Ladson-Billings, and she's from Philadelphia, I believe. And she wrote this outstanding book. It's called Dream Keepers. She wrote it in 2009. And in there, she outlines some key things about how to make sure that your classroom is more culturally inclusive. And I was going to rattle off a few of those. So one part, she says, students' real life experiences are legitimized as they become part of the official curriculum. Once again, students' real life experiences are legitimized as they become part of the official curriculum. And I encourage people out there, if you're parents, look into the curriculum for your children. Is it kind of conditioning them to assimilate to a certain way? Or do you see your culture in there? And if you don't see your culture in there, then you need to speak out, whether at the school board meeting or going to the curriculum specialist at that school and say, hey, what's going on? Why isn't Will a part of this curriculum? I encourage everybody to check that book out. It tells a lot. Why not? The second thing she says, that teachers and students participate in a broad conception of literacy that includes both literature and oratory. So examine what your students are being presented with. The next thing as a civics teacher is really important. She said, teachers and students engage in a collective struggle against the status quo. Once again, in a collective struggle against the status quo. So what are the issues going on in the community? In Philadelphia in 2021, we had over almost 550 homicides. Philadelphia is the largest poor city in the country, right? We still have a lot of segregation going on over there. What's impacting your students? And you have to use your classroom to address that. And if you're not, then you're missing out on an opportunity. And the last thing is that teachers are cognizant of themselves as political beings. You have to make sure that you are encouraging students to participate in the political process now more than ever. So what are you doing to encourage them to vote? For what I did is I created a political blog that I had my students do, where they started learning who their city council representatives are and interacting with them, learning how a bill becomes a law in the local level. And then they start connecting to that. But these are the things that we have to do. And right now, the most important part is you have to know and appreciate the culture of the students that you're teaching. If you don't do that, then it's always going to be butting heads.
Thank you. I can't tell you how encouraging it is to me as a parent of teenagers, right? To hear that teachers like you are taking those, well, like all of you, honestly, taking those extra steps, because I mean, we're here, we're talking about these things because this isn't the norm, right? This isn't what's happening for us and other communities of color, right? So, so thank you for that. That's really powerful, and I appreciate that very much. If I could just pivot us a little bit, Christine and Naima, I'm working on an initiative with for 3 other YWCAs outside of Tri-County area. So it's Tri-County, YWCA Tri-County area, YWCA Greater Pittsburgh, York, and Lancaster. And we've come together to form a racial healing initiative across Pennsylvania. And we intend to do that by having healing conversations in communities. That's what we're calling them, as healing conversations. And we really want to focus in on what's hurting communities, right? What's really hurting them, and hopefully reach the objective of having those communities tell us what they need, right? And what needs might be met. When it comes to where we've been the last 2 years as a collective, right? And by the collective, I don't mean just here in Pennsylvania, but like the world. During the pandemic, the coronavirus just hit everybody, whether you liked it or not, but it didn't hit everybody the same. We know that. So Naima and Christine, the virus just disrupted learning, mental health, and well-being for a great number of students. But during the pandemic, BIPOC children experienced layered trauma, right? Including racial unrest for Black Americans in our nation. Have you seen this impact on your students coming back, right? From a 2-year pandemic?
So, yeah, I'll start. I definitely see the impact of the pandemic and all of the unrest that's been happening in our country. First of all, like myself, the stress that I felt as an adult was a lot. And there were times that I felt like it was literally unbearable and like I would not be able to teach anymore. And I know last year I had a section of African-American history, and a lot of it, doing that on top of the pandemic and then just being here, it was hard enough for me. So yes, it's awful, and you could tell. So a lot of our students were already in a very fragile state mentally before the pandemic. And I think I didn't realize it. I knew it, but I didn't realize it, that the people that they had at the schools, the teachers, their peers, whoever, a lot of times their biggest supports were people outside of the home. And it doesn't necessarily mean that parents were bad. They could have been working and busy. Like everybody had a different reason. But the kids were in really fragile states. Their supports were here at school. Being home for 2 years, oh my goodness. I can't even, it was bad. They came back. So in my class in particular, I teach early childhood education, teachers that want to go into education. My class is very collaborative. It's a very engaging. You have to be up, you have to move around, you have to work with people. I couldn't do it. It was literally impossible to get my students to just want to work in groups, to want to talk to each other, to just be in a good enough mental space that they could even receive any of the content I was teaching them. So it was literally like trying to slowly rebuild students before I could teach them one thing. And now we're almost in March, and I am nowhere close to where I would be in a normal school year, because I've literally had to spend so much of my time just trying to build my kids up, just talking my kids, off the ledge, and just trying to like help however I can. Because let's be honest, the guidance counselors are swamped. There's not enough resources, I feel like, in our school, or probably any school, to provide for the kids in the way they need. So it comes down to teaching 11th graders coping skills. What do you do when you're overwhelmed? Remember, belly breaths, or you can step away and take a minute to get yourself together and then come back. And them just knowing that they have that freedom in my classroom too. You don't have to raise your hand for every little thing. You can please get up and move around. This is your house too. Get up, move. If you're feeling upset, you're feeling overwhelmed, you need to do the appropriate things to calm yourself down, because unfortunately, when you leave here, nobody's doing that. But it's kind of, you just feel like you're never done. So like, I'm almost done. Then like in my class, what we do in the morning now, instead of daily journal, is we do morning affirmations. So they had an assignment where they had to write down affirmations. They have little mirrors. So they put their cell phones in their bin. They get their mirror out the bin. They stand in the front. They say their affirmation to the class. They say it to their self again in the mirror. They sit down, because that's just where we're at. Like, we are not in a space where learning even feels like it's possible sometimes, because their mental needs are so
so large.
Yeah.
Christine, again, you know, we at the YW hope to impact communities in Pennsylvania with this initiative to have these healing conversations. Naima brought up really good examples of putting mental health first over the to-dos, right? You know, and part of the reason, well, not part of the reason, but we recognize as a collective YW family that racism is a public health crisis. That's the crisis, right? We don't have enough resources. Our schools are very underfunded, right? And that schools, access to healthcare, all those things equal, so many layers equal public health. So because we recognize that, we intend to get into these conversations. So I wonder, Christine, what all are you doing to kind of help your students back from the pandemic?
I can piggyback a lot off of what our other panelists have said, in the simple fact that and even last night in our Leading Ladies session, we discussed Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this, it is classic what we are seeing. If our basic biological needs are not met, there is a need for food because parent can't work because of COVID, or because, you know, they got laid off or their job shut down. So now we don't have food, we don't have heat, we're struggling at home, okay, for 2 years. Like Naima said, many times school is the safe place. It's a place where I go get my meal. It's a place where I can not just socialize, but where I can have an adult maybe that I can talk to. And like she said, it's not that you don't have that adult at home, but sometimes you just need to talk to somebody who's not your main person. So when those resources are taken away, we go into survival mode. And just like Naima said, as adults, we go into survival mode. I not only at the time of the pandemic was teaching, but I was also working in a hospital and caring for COVID patients. And I worked on a hospice floor. So I saw the pandemic from multiple ends. And I saw the impact it had in the community itself, in industries, and to be able to bring, first of all, that experience and that information back to my students. But then when we analyze that and we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's what our students are displaying right now. So now that we came back to school this year, and okay, maybe we can have some of those basic level needs met. Now safety and security is an issue, because what we have seen in the world in the last, year and a half, we've had so much tragedy and violence. And so now, and I can't even speak now with this whole Russia thing going on, but now safety and security is an issue. If you can't get past my basic needs and I don't feel safe, and like we said, if I can walk into a classroom and I don't feel welcome, or I don't feel accepted, or I feel shunned, or whatever the case may be, you can't begin to learn. There's no way you can even start to sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to learn how to do algebra today. No way. So what I do with my students, first of all, we study Maslow's hierarchy in depth, and we apply it. And one of my big tasks that we do is I have them sit down and I say, list, what are your needs right now? Like list your top 5 needs. And then we're going to go through some coping mechanisms. What do you do to cope? What's the appropriate, what are some healthy coping mechanisms? Because I think one of the big things that as a country, as a society, and as an industry, we didn't realize is that health disparities amongst BIPOC people, we always push it off as genetic. What we now know is that it's not. What we know is that if I am a Black woman and I walk into a convenience store and I have 4 sets of eyes on me, my stress level goes up about 10 times. But it's not the same if you're white and you walk into a convenience store. You don't have that same level of stress. So when you experience that stress everywhere you go, day in and day out, and the microaggressions, of course it takes a toll on your body. No wonder there's cardiovascular disease and diabetes and all these other yes, hypertension and everything. And then so just the mental health issues alone. So I really try to ingrain that into them now at this stage of their their career path so that hopefully they can make change by the time, they become the physicians of the world and working in public health and these other arenas, or teachers even. So it has been very difficult. I like to say it's almost like if, when you're parents that you have parents that are separated and you send your kids to their other parent for the weekend and then you bring them back home and you have to kind of redirect them to, no, these are the rules here. This is what we do. It's kind of how it's been for the last 6 months or so.
That's heavy. That's heavy. And if I could just take a minute to acknowledge how heavy that is and the wonderful job that you guys are all doing, because, not everybody is taking those things to account. And I gotta say, as educators of color, you guys are, because you understand intimately well why they're so tired in the morning because, right? And Matt talked about how his lovely teacher and how she knew he wasn't a bad kid, right? She just knew he needed a little direction and a little focus. She had that intimate understanding. So Matt and Ross, talk to me a little bit about what you all are seeing now that, we're like in year 2 of this pandemic and public health crisis, layered on top of racial unrest and all the intersections and layers. Tell me about that.
Well, I'd like to give credit to Christine about just having those sets of eyes on you. And I think of My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, and how you have to gauge your body when that happens to you, not just when you're Black, but when you're white or you're a police officer. You got to know what situation you're going into all the time, what community, what room. And it's that two-ness and double consciousness that primarily Black people face with code switching. We got to know where we're at all times, and we're only comfortable most times at home. But I remember, just like many educators, I had to pack up my classroom when it first hit with the pandemic. I had to go home and actually learn how to use Zoom and Google Classroom. And I think it was a great benefit, because it helped me get to where I'm at now, as far as having to still use those things. But what was really a gap was with parents that aren't that tech savvy, and they didn't know whether their students were logged in or logged off. And being on a laptop could be just playing video games and not even being in class. I talked to a lot of students back home and teachers back home that were going through the pandemic, explaining to me that they didn't even have the resources. They didn't even have the laptops. If they had laptops, they didn't have good internet service. My time in the city teaching, a lot of students had bad service. So going into the building, as Naima and Christine are speaking to, it's like a safe haven for students to come there, not only for recognition, sometimes for meals, and sometimes for internet service. They can't even complete assignments because they couldn't connect, they couldn't get in. And then you're facilitating a classroom with Zoom. And me, early on, I'm learning how to bring them in while I'm like in the middle of teaching something, and they're not able to get in because their service was lagging. And it was a lot to balance. And the digital divide was already wide, but it made it wider for sure during this pandemic. And many fail to realize that schools are safe havens for many of our students. So it was very detrimental for them to be away. And I can relate to having to start over and over again with the students, and you can't even make it up to the actual lesson itself because you are being a therapist, even though you're a teacher. So definitely can connect to what everyone is saying in regards to that.
Again, kudos to all of you for wearing the many hats. Ross, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I used to have all this black hair. Now it's all gray. I don't know what happened. I think it was the pandemic.
I say the pandemic pushed up my glasses wearing them.
Yeah, definitely. If you see a teacher, thank a teacher. And I know it's like a corny phrase, but we really need to, because it's been really traumatic on our end as well, because like Matt was saying, it's a safe space. So students come to us, and when they come to us, we're seeing the trauma of what they've encountered over the last 2 years, whether it's of watching George Floyd, being choked to death, or just the pandemic, right? We're having, children who have lost family members, and now they're coming to the classroom and they're trying to cope with that. I'm seeing a lot of drug use, and like I've never seen before in the classroom. And so we're seeing all these things, and at the same time, we're trying to give hope and point them in the right direction. And it can be very wearing and taxing on us because we're in there with masks on. So overall, we're doing a tough job, but now times that by 10. And one thing we need to think about, for those who are not in the classroom, you're probably saying, what can I do? Well, in Pennsylvania now, they're coming up with this budget, and Governor Wolf is proposing this budget for fair funding. We need to contact our representatives and push to have this done. It's insane, right? It's now needed more than ever. So they built a $5 billion stadium. I saw we all, for those who watch the Super Bowl, $5 billion stadium. Yet we're sending students home and saying, hey, here's a laptop, make it happen. Well, how can they connect and do these Zooms if they don't have high-speed internet? It's lagging, so they just shut it off, and there's that disconnect. Some of my students, I teach the old kids, so I teach the 12th graders, and a lot of them right now are on the front lines working in the fast food industry. And so they've been working during the pandemic. Now they're required to come back early in school. Why am I going to come back if I've been making money? Maybe I might need to postpone going to college because I've been offered to have this opportunity to be a manager at this particular location. And so we're grappling with those opportunities and the lack of funding. And it's not really looking good, but there is hope because, we're here and we're coming up as a collective group with some suggestions, but it really is going to take each and every one of us on this call. If you're not in the classroom, help us. Contact your representative. Why is it that we're dealing with situations where students are in classroom in September and it's 90 degrees outside and it's 100 degrees inside the building? But 2 miles to my north, there's air conditioning in the classroom. That's a problem. And if we choose to ignore the problem, well, that problem is going to manifest it. And then people are wondering, why are people angry? Why is this going on? Why is crime rising in these particular areas? It's because we're not investing in education. And I feel, me personally, I might be wrong, education is a great equalizer. And if we don't invest in it, then we're creating a problem that we're going to face and our kids are going to face. So we just really need to advocate for those whose voice is marginalized right now and make it known that we're not going to take this anymore.
Thank you. Thank you. And you beat me to the punch because I was gonna segue into action steps and boom, there you did it. So I'd like to turn over to the audience, and I wonder if we have any questions from our audience for our panelists, if anybody would like to enter something in the chat. Otherwise, we've got a lot to say here. This is a dynamic group, so I know that we can fill the time until 7:30, but if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, now's the time to do it. Give it a minute or so. Yes.
Anna, can I piggyback off of what Ross said? Talking about like when you go to certain schools and they don't have the resources that a school maybe a mile over has. The thing about that is it's not like when we were in school where we knew there were nicer schools or you knew they had other things. These kids know for a fact they're able to see it. Social media has made our world extremely small. So they get to see firsthand what other schools have, the resources, and they're young and they're angry. They see it. They're not aware. And I think there's this misconception that young people are not paying attention. And, everybody's like, all they're doing is that they're on TikTok and this. And yes, they are. But for every time they make a dance, they're also watching these videos. They're learning and they will come in and why don't we have this? Or why aren't we learning this? Or the reason our schools are being treated this way is because of that. The kids are very aware. They want to be involved. And I think there's like a really big misconception that the kids aren't aware. So it's hard sometimes when they're asking you these tough questions that you can't answer. Like they're looking at me like, you're the teacher, you're the adult, you should have an answer. But when they're asking me things like, well, why are we getting treated this way? And why don't we have this? Or why don't we have that? It's hard sometimes because like, I don't have an answer. And you get tired of saying, oh, that's just the way things are here. And I think that we need to get to a point where, like, when are we going to stop saying, like, that's just the way it is? When are we going to stop being okay with bare minimum? And I think that we need to keep pushing our kids, and we need to keep pushing the politicians and whoever. I'm not a history teacher, so I can't tell you all of the steps needed, but I also am to a point now where I even want to learn more about this stuff, because something has to change. Like this, my kids are affected. My kids are Pottstown graduates and currently in the district. So it not only affects the kids that I love, like my school kids, but my biological kids and generations of other people that, I'm sorry. Thank you, Ross. I just wanted to.
No. You were on a beautiful roll there. Thank you for that. And
if I may follow up with Ross and Naima.
Yeah, we do have one question in the chat
okay.
though.
Okay.
Go ahead though.
What Ross is speaking to, the civic engagement for everyone, the community to get involved. As history teachers, we teach segregation as if it's something that's archaic. And I tell my students this all the time. And just Ross' example shows you that the funding being distributed to certain areas proves that we're still involved in segregation. What Naima's speaking to is, you can Google the top 10 schools or what's considered good. And that's segregation. That's modern day segregation for a school to be good in the top 10 or top 25. Well, what about the other schools? The resources is what makes them, makes us all still segregated. And involvement with the community, it takes a village. That's my motto. Like, we have to form in numbers. There's strength in numbers for us to collectively exercise these rights, to ask what we need. Make that 10-point plan, make our own 10-point plan, like go up to the school with a plan. We need this. How do we get it? Who do we need to talk to? The mayor, right. The governor. That's that civic engagement that you'll see in Ross's class, and definitely mine. And when we're teaching this side of politics versus government before we ever get into the historical events.
Awesome. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Truly. I was that nerdy kid who was excited when she turned 18 because she could register to vote. My mom was like, what is wrong with you? Like, that's why you're excited? I'm like, yes, that's why I'm excited. So we do have a couple questions in the chat. So I'll start with the first one from, and I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Andea, are there any programs to recruit teachers of color, and are the compensation for teachers competitive? Great question. Ross, you want to take that one?
Correct. Yeah, I know there's this Call Me Mr. program that I think is in some teacher prep programs going on. I think that's out of Clemson. And then I know at Arcadia, they have a SAGE program where they're trying to develop teachers of color. But that's something that really needs to develop a little bit more. And so we need funding for that, right? You have to get funding. First off, what I'm hearing from my students is, hey, why would I want to be a teacher, right? You're not making any money. I'm like, contrary to misconception, we actually do make money. But sometimes that's all they hear. The other thing is, if you have a negative experience in your K through 12 life, why in God's name would you want to come back into the classroom? So that's the first thing we need to address. If you have a miserable experience, you're not going to want to get into it. And so we're seeing that. So we need to work on how we are preparing and training teachers who are currently in the classroom to make sure they understand the diversity of the students that they're teaching. The one thing to talk to that, Ndaye, is this is a great thing. Imagine if that first grader right now, that's young person of color that's about to enter kindergarten, imagine if you had that trajectory and think that person's going to come up with the cure for cancer. Right? Just imagine that. Wouldn't you want that child to have all the resources they need from K through 12? And let's say that child is growing up in North Philly, right? Absolutely. Wouldn't you want to have that child have the laboratory and all the things? So we need to start putting up that gated mentality where it's about me, 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 me. And if you have it, great job, you got it. But you need to advocate for people who don't have it, because maybe that's why we haven't found the cure for cancer yet, because we're underfunding areas where it's going to come out of. So if we change our approach and we advocate for that, give the funding for those teacher prep programs, I think we have some hope on that end.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I add to kind of what Ross was saying a little bit?
Yes, please.
I'm going to advocate for Naima's program, because it is her program that you would go into if you want to become a teacher. Here in Pottstown, we're very fortunate that we have our career and technical education programs right here in the building. Students do not have to leave and travel and go to a career tech center. But if we had more programs like that spread out, even if it wasn't a program and it was just a class or a course in school, where if you want to become a teacher, you take this course, you take this class, you build them up from the ground. It's like building them up from the ground up. You're kind of grooming your own. So, and many people don't realize that, because, you know, they hear early childhood education, they think daycare, and we're like, no, that's not what it is. So I think that's another way to kind of promote and get students to be interested in becoming teachers and educators.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback off of that, thank you, Christine. You're right. My program is called Early Childhood Education, and oftentimes people are like, no, well, you don't want to work in daycare, or they think that we're just stuck with working in childcare centers, and there's nothing wrong with that, because in my opinion, the most important things we're going to learn are happening during that time. But like Ross said, you're not going to be able to get Black people to want to come back. Black men are so underrepresented in education. But then when you look at the reasons why, when you look at how Black boys as young as in preschool are kind of isolated and singled out. I think the YW, you guys did a training for us a couple years ago. And one of the statistics, I can't quote it perfectly, but it was something along the lines of 100 plus early child care teachers watched a video of children playing. And then they were supposed to tell you which students they felt were going to need most of their attention. I think it was like 80-something% of the teachers said the little Black boy in the video, and then like maybe 20 or 30, something, the other, like another percentage was for the white girl in the video. The only thing about that is none of the kids were misbehaving. So what makes you say that the young Black boy is going to need so much of your attention if he wasn't even misbehaving? So what that turns into is, because of their implicit bias that they, you know, don't even realize they have, you're watching little Black boys under microscopes, and you're making school so unbearable that they think they hate school learning, but no, you just hate school because the environment, it isn't a safe space. You don't feel like you belong. You feel like you're always getting in trouble. So that's why we do need teachers from every walk of life to be in these classrooms and to kind of advocate for the kids, because a lot of times, I hate to say it, a lot of the teachers that are responsible for teaching our students have a lot of control over that student's success and destiny. Obviously, those students have to do that work. But if you want to be a teacher and you don't feel like, you know, somebody sees it, just like pushing them, like Ross said, what if he would have had a teacher tell him a lot sooner, or pushing him sooner? What would he have done in writing? Why did it take when he was a senior? So I think kind of just making school right now a place that Black students feel like they belong and they are safe in, and is beneficial to them, would encourage a lot more of them to come back. And I think it's that simple.
I couldn't, right, you're right. And I couldn't possibly agree more. I want to give Matt a little time here, because we've got about 9 minutes with these fine folks. And of course, now they're not being shy and there's questions, but we are running out of time. But Matt, you are our guest, so I would like to give you your time to say what you were trying to say.
I just want to add to, I agree, I'm in full agreement with everything that was said, but my time in Philly, there was an apprenticeship where they were trying to raise young Black men to become teachers. My current situation, there's a program where they're making it more of an interest. And as Ross mentioned, a lot of time they stray away because of the pay, but there's some opportunities out there to be paid pretty well as educators. But that's the first thing that comes to mind as students begin to choose or think about what they want to do. But it's few and far between. I think we all can agree that it's not enough. We have these programs. We have what Christine and Naima are doing. for that encouragement, but we need more across the board for sure.
Yeah, and we need that fair funding, back to what Ross pointed out and highlighted. Sadly, we're not going to have too much time for questions. Maybe let me look at the questions and see if there's one that maybe we can answer quickly. How can we better educate our communities regarding CRT? I don't know if that one's going to be short or not, but how can we better educate our communities regarding CRT and what it is and is not? It's difficult to have an inclusive classroom where there's so much disparity between parents, back to what you all were highlighting, whose attitudes keep into our kids' thinking. So I think what they're talking about there is, or it sounds like they're talking about negativity being a narrative at home. So what you as teachers can do, and you guys did talk about that, give some examples of how you're doing it, Ross, but you're not calling it CRT, right? You're just highlighting some differences in the normal curriculum that we've had so far.
Yeah.
So if you want to just answer that real quick, Ross.
Yeah, I'll answer, no problem, real quickly. Is we fear what we don't know, and so we have to go to the experts. And so I'm just going to give one. This is organization in Philadelphia. It's called the Center for Black Educator Development, and one of the great educators, Sharif El-Mekki, kind of formed that, and they provide training and professional development around it. In the summer, they also have this freedom schools as well. If you're interested in that, just check that out, or supporting it. But I would probably say go to the experts. And once again, it's the Center for Black Educator Development.
Thank you so much for that. And we're recording this, so these things, this conversation, these centers and resources that you named will be easy to find for folks when they play this back. And for the participants that came here today, you'll get a lot of this information back in your emails. So no worries there. Thank you so much. Like, this was such a rich and for me, heartfelt conversation. We do this work day in and day out, and it's just nice to get into space with other folks in the work, out on the field, boots in the ground. I used to be more boots on the ground, so I got special love for what you all do on the ground. So thank you so very much. I'm truly honored for your commitment to your communities, your students, and all the wonderful work that you're doing. And if anybody wants to share any more resources so we can get these fine folks in the audience, speak now. We've only got a few more minutes.
I don't have any resources to share, but I do want to say, not only really quick, do we need more Black teachers in the classrooms, we need more Black administrators, and we need more people in leadership and the people that are making these decisions that will affect Black students. Because sometimes, all teachers, we know we don't have as much power as people seem to think. And a lot of decisions are being made about Black students for people that don't truly understand what our needs are, no matter how many classes they've taken, no matter how much they've been there. So I think that we need to create more room for Black people in administration and the people that are making these rules and the curriculum and stuff for our districts as well. So just being involved, please, parents, we need you.
We need you, parents. You hear that? We need you, parents. Thank you so much for that, Naima. So important. Matt, I feel like this is a moment for you. I feel like you got something to say. I don't know. I'm an empath.
I mean, you can see the books behind me, and I could give you a list of books and to determine make your own assessment of what's CRT and what's not. Definitely the 1619 project, Hannah Nicole Jones, she did her thing with that. I think that book alone is starting or created the buzz with what you see now. My Grandmother's Hand. You see Angela Davis behind me.
Yes.
Patrice Colors for sure. Stamped, I can't say enough how important Stamped is by Even Rex Kendi. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast, but there's just a lot out there. And if you tap into that world, I do it on a regular basis. And some of those things, you got to definitely be reluctant to bring them into the classroom and keep them to yourself, because you have that understanding. Like I have that understanding along with a lot of people. And then if you read up on that and understand the difference and understand the reason for that with Hannah Nicole Jones, like she was encouraged by one of her few Black teachers to realize at an early age, she foresaw that this isn't enough about my people. I need to go find these resources and research so I can create something to show the world that there's way much more Black history than we're taught. Like she had the foresight that many of us explained it tonight. We didn't see it at an early age, but it took that one Black teacher for her to see and create something special, in my opinion. But check that out. Check anything in relative to that to see the difference and make your own assessment instead of just hearing about this buzzword.
The buzzword, right? These buzzwords, make your own, draw your own conclusions. And on that note, I think that's a perfect way for us to end our time together, is to encourage folks to dig in for themselves and not into the key buzzwords of what further divides us, right? Those of us at the YW, we do our book club. So, always stay tuned for that. And these topics are always at the forefront of those conversations for folks. So, so absolutely. Again, that's a perfect note to end it on. Go read up, like these fine educators said, and draw your own conclusions for yourself. So yeah, thank you so much. You guys were awesome, and we appreciate you. And we're wishing everyone in our audience a wonderful night, and we thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. My
Thank you
pleasure.
so much,
Yes,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
so
Have a good evening.
You as well.